Thank you so much for coming today. I'm Greg Kimball. I used to work here at the library, and I retired and then got a new job almost immediately as chief historian for the development in Shockoe Bottom, the Shockoe Institute. And we'll be opening in the spring of next year. Yeah, we're excited. Thank you. Wonderful project to work on in the twilight of my career. And I have three very distinguished panelists here with me. I'll introduce them in order. So first, I know someone that many of you know, Cisa Joy Moon. Give her a big round of applause. Yes. She is a native Richmonder, and she's the Chief Impact Officer for the Girl Scouts of the USA. Prior to that, she was, yes. Prior to that, she was the Chief Diversity Officer of the U.S. House of Representatives and served as the Director of the U.S. House Office of Diversity and Inclusion from June 2022 to May 2023. She's a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University. Go Rams. Yeah, go Rams, go Rams. And also received an MS from the L. Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. So one thing she's really done all, I think, her career is give back. And I know she's got an endowment that she, at VCU, in tribute to her maternal grandparents, I believe. Yeah. And also one at Virginia Union as well as Virginia State University. And she also holds a PhD in public administration and urban policy from Old Dominion. So she's made her way around the state. Yeah. And as we know from why we're here today, she serves as the executive director of the Jackson Project, a grantee of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation's Monuments Project, and received the American Association for State and Local History's 2022 Leadership in History Award. So please give a round of applause for Cisa. I know these are a little long, but it's hard to cut them down because they've done so many great things. Again, someone that I think a lot of us here in Richmond know, Viola Osborne Baskerville, also a Richmond native, with deep ancestral roots in our state. She's retired from public service now, but is an avid family and public historian, genealogist, and preservationist. She spent 18 years of doing public service in the Richmond City Council, the city's planning commission, and as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates, and as Secretary of Administration for the Commonwealth of Virginia from 2006 to 2010. She has spearheaded numerous public history projects, most recently organizing citizens to save Richmond Community Hospital from demolition. Yeah. She's worked on the placement of the Arthur Ashe Monument, the Virginia Civil Rights Memorial on Capitol Square, and also restoration and renovation of the Virginia State Capitol. Last but certainly not least is Anna Edwards, public historian, yes. She has a deep interest in particularly the history of Gabriel's Rebellion and that early national period, which I think a lot of us don't really know that much about, so that's a great thing. And one of the things that I think is most important about Anna's work is combining her deep love of social justice with the historic preservation element. I think we have to have both of those and understand that when we do these projects, they need to answer the questions about today rather than just be historical. Founding chair of the Sacred Ground Historical Reclamation Project since 2004. One of the prime advocates for the Shockoe Bottom African American Burial Ground and the 9-acre Memorial Park. Consultant for the Shockoe Project, which is leading the effort to interpret that. She is an assistant professor of African American Studies at VCU, and also a museum educator. Are you still there? No, you're not at American Civil War anymore. No. Yeah, she was at the American Civil War Museum. Yeah. Go Rams, right? And she's a member of a newly formed group, the Black Historic Preservationist Alliance, which is fantastic that that has been established and moving forward. Because I think, as you'll hear in our comments today from our panelists, I am just so excited that so many great things are happening in the city of Richmond. I think that will transform the city and really mean that when someone comes here and wants to learn about American history, and I emphasize that, because and also to dig deeply into African American history, that they will have really an incredible array of sources and sites to visit while they do that. Just briefly thinking about historic preservation in the city since I've been here, and I've been here since 1986. I think back to projects I worked on. One of the first preservation things I ever worked on with Denise Lester, who is a fantastic person, and was the Barton Heights Cemetery. Anybody been there? Do you know what that is? Yeah. This was 1987 or so. And I was writing an article about the cemetery because we had a number of things in the library's collection about it. And I drove up and down North Avenue, and I was like, where is this thing? Well, it was a big field with grass about this high and no sign anywhere of any markers. And Denise, who was from upstate New York, but who had a great-grandfather who was one of the sextons at one of the 7 cemeteries that make up that cemetery, really single-handedly came in and got the city, who owned the site, to clean it up, put up a marker. So it was an early example to me as more of an academic historian of what could be done with people exerting a little bit of pressure on other people to do the right thing. I think of all my work at Shredder Ironworks and restoring that site, and some wins and some losses, frankly, in terms of that landscape. And thinking about how it is when you have a private landowner who you have to deal with, and I know that's something we will talk about. In terms of doing the right thing, the archaeology, and of course we'll get into the whole issue of what the law actually says we can expect or do in terms of review of any kinds of historical resources. And finally, and I want to end this on a hopeful note, and particularly thank Anna for her work on this, but to me, the work in the bottom when the ballpark was proposed was a watershed in my mind. When I first came to Richmond, there were kind of like 10 white guys who got together at the Commonwealth Club, and they pretty much decided what was going to happen in this city. I mean, it really was that way. And what I saw in that moment was people who were motivated, who knew the history, who made the change and said, no, we're not doing that. On this site, which is really a site of conscience. That's really the way we should think about it. So that's the good news. The thing that I think I'd love to talk about with you all is we need to identify these sites before they become a crisis. So we need to know what are the absolutely most important sites in our city that absolutely should never be subjected to that kind of a development, because I feel like we haven't done that work yet. And so I'm curious to hear from all of you what your thoughts are on how we get there to do that, because we need to look ahead, not backwards. So with that little introduction, I'm going to start with you, Sisha. Okay. I just really would like you to tell us a little bit about your project and sort of how it came to be, and particularly the kinds of things that you were able to do to fund this thing, which is really remarkable, and maybe give people a sense of what it takes to launch a completely new historical site.
Well, can y'all hear me? Yeah. Okay. So how we got started was with a sisterly ask that was not supposed to turn into a project. My sister Anjali Moon has a film festival called the Africana Independent Film Festival, at the height of the pandemic, she still wanted to show up in community with the festival and asked for me to pair each of the sites that she was going to screen outside with facts. We call them black ass facts. I like doing, I don't know, I guess I like researching, even though I didn't realize how much I did. I don't know why. I mean, everything in Richmond's named after somebody, so I don't do the exercise of wondering whose things are named after. But for some odd reason, even though I've spent so much time in Jackson Ward, I mean, June Jubilee, 2nd Street Festival, Croker Spot, you name it. For the first time in my life, I just said, who's Jackson in Jackson Ward? And I thought Google was going to solve this for me. That led me to the library. This is how me and Greg Kimball met one another. It sent us down this long rabbit hole about who is the Jackson in Jackson Ward. That then led to also recognizing not just who is Jackson, but who are all these streets named after, understanding the Confederate origins of Jackson Ward, the fact that it didn't even get its name till 1871, and its name actually derives from being a politically gerrymandered district. You know, growing up, I just thought it was just a community name, but no, it was a politically based name. So then we started figuring out who all the streets were named after. No surprise, now understanding the origins of the ward, named after Confederate soldiers, pro-slavery sympathizers, or enslavers themselves. So that led to us doing the largest mass street installation in the city's history to rename the streets in honorary designation for more deserving Jackson Wardians. But also we found out a lot of this information just shy of the ward turning 150 years old. So held a citywide celebration. That then led us to a formative project. That led me back to Greg because we wanted to ensure that the street names reflected the full arc of the ward. So we had more contemporary figures like Lorna Pinckney and Lily Estes, God bless the dead. And then I went to Greg again. I said, who's the first black person that you know who owned a house in Jackson Ward? And Greg, I mean, y'all should spend some time with Greg. He's the most incredible person ever. He says, oh, actually, Sisha, in 1992, I wrote an article about this guy named Abraham Peyton Skipwith. He was like, we don't know a lot about him, but he built this home in 1793. It's a 3-roof Dutch gambrel roof cottage. And as has been the case since the day I walked in here in 2020, Greg doesn't just like point you to the archives room. He goes with you, and he goes on the journey alongside you. And that led us to Abraham Peyton Skipwith. We'll talk about him a little bit later, I'm sure. And it led to what then became what I thought was going to be this super inspiring story of the first known black homeowner, the founding father of Jackson Ward, but then led to what we thought was the destruction of his home for the highway. But then because of our relationship with Michael Paul Williams, shout out to Michael Pulitzer Prize winning Paul Williams, he says, Sisha, I know you like to do research, girl. That house was not torn down. Think it was taken. And lo and behold, the home was put on a flatbed for $25 and still sits to this day on the former plantation of the Secretary of War for the Confederate Army. That led to us saying, okay, let's not only make Jackson a nonprofit, but let's also reconstruct his house. And we'll talk about its relationship to America 250. As it relates to the things I've learned and how we were able to be successful, I mean, I do think that me and my sister are, I think we bring something to the table, but this is nothing but ancestrally done. It's no way to explain why 2 little black girls could accomplish all of this in 5 years. So I think one is the ancestors, and 2, I think it's the community. Every single part of our project, even down to everybody sitting on this stage, has been a part of this journey. When I look at Ashley in the crowd, she's one of our first program partners in this work. And I also think it's because we have been responsible and respectful of how we've gone about it. Maggie Walker Community Land Trust and RRHA gifted us those 11 parcels as an act of restorative justice, but the very first thing that we did was an architectural analysis of the land and then an archaeological analysis of the land. When you understand Skipwith, we thought about his belongings and that house being taken and bulldozed in the 1950s. But if you look at his will, he was buried there. The first cemetery in the city was not established till 1799. There are multiple generations of black Jackson Wardians that are buried all over this city. And he was buried in Jackson Ward, and so that highway took his body. And so we wanted to make sure that we built responsibly, that we engage with the community. We've done community engagement activations at almost every point in the journey. This symposium and working with you guys is a byproduct of the work. And so I think it's been leaning into community, and really, I genuinely feel this way. I don't feel like Skipwith, I think he died thinking he had done everything right. And this city took everything away from him. And I feel like he can't rest in peace until we do right by him. And that's the only way I can explain the success of a project that started off with a question. And more importantly, the long the world's longest sisterly favor of all time. Like, I will never, Anjali can never ask me for a favor ever again. Okay? So, yeah.
Well, I can attest that you have a lot of skills. And I'm sure some of those came to bear when you got the melon money and many other things that you've done to make this thing happen. But I really appreciate you're talking about the community of people who really care about this history and want to see it move forward. And it's the best. Again, I think back to all the experiences I've had, and can't remember a time when we had this kind of energy around the projects that we're talking about. And that gives me hope for the future, despite what may be happening politically on a larger level. I think the work is there.
Say one more thing
Sure.
really quickly, and also community. Yes, Jackson Ward is the first historically registered Black urban neighborhood, but I had somebody come to me early on in the project when we first released the rendering of the Skipwith Roper Cottage and the Jackson House, and house is spelled H-A-U-S. And at first they were like, why would you spell it that way? Are you trying to just be cool and hip? I said, no, Jackson Ward originally were immigrants of Jewish and German faith as well as Black folk. That side of Broad Street was for people that were viewed as less than. And I said, and so house, H-A-U-S, is a German derivative of the term, and we're trying to set a precedent where we don't erase other communities in the ways that we were erased. So I also just want to hold space for other communities as well.
It was a remarkably diverse neighborhood, which is one of the things that used to surprise people when we would talk about Richmond in that period. Is unfortunately, slavery was the means of control, and in a sense, our idea of racial segregation is what we think of as equals racism. Doesn't always. Viola, you have worked on so many different projects. I don't know which one to ask you about. But I'll let you decide what you might, maybe one that, again, gives us some lessons on how one gets projects done.
Well, let's talk about, my mic is on, right? You hear me? Okay.
There should be a button on it. It should be green.
Now it's on, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Let's talk about the most recent one that took all of my life in 2024 and still taking piece of it. And I want to start where one of the pieces Cece talked about was community. And the other piece is the Black press. The particular building was Richmond Community Hospital, which was supported in the turn of the century by the Black press and the Black community. It was the information that the Black press gave to the community that furthered the development and ensured the development of that hospital by Dr. Sarah Garland Boyd Jones. Even though she died in 1905, her dream lived on because of the community involvement and because the word was in the press. So I want to start at those two pieces. And it was the press in 2024, the Richmond Free Press, that first announced that Virginia Union University, the property owner of Richmond Community Hospital, was set to demolish the building because they were wanting to plan market rate housing. This wasn't even housing for students. This was market rate housing. Virginia Union University is a HBCU, private HBCU. The hospital is on private property, and that community adjacent is Frederick Douglass Court. So you have a residential community, African American, started in the 1920s for the upwardly mobile Black community. You have a university, an educational institution as an anchor, and then you have a hospital servicing the Black community, not only in Northside, but Richmond at large, because the 1920s, 1930s, the city of Richmond, the state of Virginia, certainly under segregation and Jim Crow, did not want to provide healthcare services for the growing needs of the Black community. So Dr. Sarah Garland Boyd Jones, other Black physicians understood this, and they skillfully navigated that Jim Crow lane and said, okay, you don't want to integrate. We understand Jim Crow, but we understand also that our community has needs for better hospital care and hospital services. So they galvanized themselves together to make that happen. And in 1932, they received approval, but they needed 2 more years because they had to have an ambulance bay. And then in 1934, they finally opened at that building that is now at 1209 Overbrook Road. So because of the strength of the community, that was put in place. The fight last year was because of the strength of the community that said, no, we will not allow this to happen. And I have to give kudos to the diversity in the community that came together. And one of our early partners on was the Quaker community, the Friends community. He is no longer with us today, but Alan Shincius came forward after I wrote a letter to the editor of the Free Press and said, we cannot allow this to happen. So we started an informational page, our Facebook page. We started to let people know what was going on. People wrote letters. Thankfully, we had letters from the Jackson Project that supported us. We had information and letters from the defenders that supported us so that people could see that this was a grassroots across the spectrum support. We had letters from sororities that supported us. We had letters from different organizations. Preservation Virginia put it on its list of most endangered spaces for the Commonwealth of Virginia. In fact, it was #1. Historic Richmond Foundation came to the table. We started with the yard signs because, you know, Richmond loves these yard signs. It doesn't have to be a political season to have a yard sign in Richmond. We upgraded the yard sign and put a QR code on it so the younger generation could get the information about what was going on. We did what Alan would call a kabuki theater, which means that we just planted ourselves on the space. We reclaimed the space, literally reclaimed the space by having Sunday services there. We called them Sunday community, communion on the lawn, I guess is what we called it. And we chose a color to unify ourselves. So we used green because green is the color of the hoods of the physicians when they graduate or receive their medical degrees. That was our color of conscience for the movement. And then we had an altar in front of the hospital so that people could not only give contributions, because we needed to have money to make these things happen. For the yard signs, we had to have money. But we also had individuals to just testify what was their story, how were they connected to the buildings, because these buildings are more than just bricks and mortar. These buildings have stories related to them. And when we can start to humanize the building, when you can start to tell Skipsworth's story through the building, when you can start to tell the stories of the enslaved people, what they were going through, then that lessens the opportunity that people will want to demolish it. It becomes meaningful to them in some way. The other opportunity that we took advantage of was that in the year 2024, it marked 90 years since the actual building was opened. And this building was not the original Richmond Community Hospital. The original Richmond Community Hospital was at 406 East Baker Street. That was erased because the Highway 95 came through there. It's now a vacant lot. But it moved from 406 East Baker to Overbrook Road. But in 1934, it opened the second building there. And 1934, it opened the second building there on Independence Day weekend. And so we took advantage of that fact. In fact, on the 4th of July, it opened, 1934. We took advantage of that historical fact, and we had our own Independence Day celebration on the site with an antique automobile of that period. We had popcorn available, and we had a table where we asked the community again, what would you like to see this building be used as? And they gave all sorts of really good ideas that related to the history of the place as a medical facility. And we put that in a letter, and we turned that over to the president, the board of directors, and the Alumni Association. And this was a way of not only humanizing the space and giving stories to the space, but reclaiming the space for 2024 and going forward. We were also thankful that people like Michael Paul Williams, who was a graduate of Virginia Union University, came out and spoke in favor of saving the building. Selden Richardson, well-known architectural historian, came out in favor of saving the building. So it was a community, again, that came forward to speak for saving the building. And in fact, the second great-grandnephew of Dr. Sarah Garland Boyd-Jones was actually on site when we had our July Independence Day celebration. So again, I would say, I would start with what Shasta said and end with that. Sisha, I'm giving you a new name, Sisha. I'm sorry. Community, the press, making people aware of what's going on, telling the story of the place, telling the stories, letting the people tell the stories of their association with the place. And then I would say collaboration and partnerships. Those are crucial.
Very good.
Sisha, thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So just to be clear, there was no legal impediment for them tearing this building down. Am I correct in that saying that?
I don't think there's any legal impediment. I mean, it's standing today. What has to happen, though, is to make sure they are aware of the fact that the community is keeping eyes on them, that they do not have demolition. We don't have demolition by neglect. That there's pressure upon the administration to do the right thing. It's on private property.
Yes,
and
yeah,
nobody
I say
likes
that,
bad news.
Well, that's the thing. I say that only because I think a lot of people have the idea that somehow there is legal code in Virginia or nationally, and there is some, but that would prevent a private owner of a property from doing this. But reality is there really is and isn't at all. And so it is going to be the kind of moral persuasion.
Bad press. Nobody wants bad press.
So I think, unfortunately, that's an important lesson we have to understand about this process. So that's a great example. Thank you for that. Now we'll turn to Anna. You want to talk about the bottom? Okay. I hope you do.
Well, I was trying to figure out sort of like where was I going to jump in, but I think talking about the press is really a good one. So I'll start by saying that the progress, the significant progress that we were able to make came because, one, we didn't know anything about what we were doing in the beginning, and it was really an effort to educate the public. As a social justice group, the Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality, which was really pretty new in 2002, we learned about the burial ground. Several of our members already knew about Gabriel's Rebellion and had done for years. My husband, Phil Willeto, was at that time writing for the Richmond Free Press and had written a story about Gabriel's Rebellion, and he'd actually written about him before in Milwaukee when he was there. So I learned about Gabriel from Dr. Audrey Smedley, when she published her book, her anthropology book on race in America. And that was in 1999. So there was sort of this convergence of people who had some awareness of the story of Gabriel's Rebellion, but what was clear was that it was not popularly known in Richmond. It was not a story. I mean, some people might, and usually if you ask them about it, what is the name that people always use? Now, you will never say that again. Are you listening? You will never say that again. If you want to be historically accurate, because he never used that name and no one ever gave him that name, not his slaveholder, nobody until some point later, and someday I'll have the time to do the research and dig in and figure out who published the first story where they decided they needed to give him a last name and used what is sometimes real, but sometimes a trope, that enslaved people were always given the name of their slaveholder. That is not true. So, but in any event, so all of these things are happening, and to sort of, when we really decided that one, we needed to, we really wanted to publicize this story and make it popularly known, because we felt like the story of Gabriel's Rebellion ties us to the story of the American Revolution, but it really more effectively and at the same time ties us to the story of the Haitian Revolution, the Black struggle for freedom in this hemisphere. And that a story of a failed rebellion or a thwarted rebellion should not be dismissed simply because they weren't able to pull it off for the various reasons they couldn't. But what went into the attempt and the timing and the context, the historical context for that attempt, is a remarkable story, and it took place here in Richmond, and it was not understood. And not only that, the site from which we were sort of using as our pulpit, the African burial ground down in Shockoe Bottom, because at that time, many people sort of understood or kind of slipped past the fact that there was information, but we believed that the gallows where Gabriel had died had been on the site of the burial ground. And so 8 blocks away, 25 years earlier, right around the time Gabriel was born, there was a very potent speech that was given at St. John's Church, right? And what's the short version that we call that speech? Or give me death. And does anybody recall what is the slogan that Gabriel and his people were going to march into Richmond behind? Louder. Death or liberty, right? Which is a literal translation of that which Toussaint Louverture used in Haiti, right? So mort ou liberté. So we are talking about, we always have to be careful about assuming too much. But in any event, we know that people were aware of the Haitian Revolution. We know that over time, and you can point to Frederick Douglass, that the Haitian Revolution was pointed to regularly by Black advocates for abolition, and in fact also for motivation to enlist in the United States Army following the, what do you call it? Emancipation Proclamation that also created the United States Colored Troops, right? So all of these things. But at that moment, we were just trying to sort of make sure people knew it. We picked October 10th as the day to unveil the first historic marker in the city near the burial ground. The following year, so we formed our group as a result of that event, at which we had a symposium, and which included Michael Blakey from the New York African Burial Ground, Douglas Edgerton, who had written the most well-known book to that point about the history of Gabriel's Rebellion. It included Elizabeth Camborian, who was a local historian and student of Phil Schwartz, who was also on that symposium, who was a historian of slavery in Virginia. And I talked, and Phil talked, and Reggie Gordon, who was a member of the Defenders for a hot minute. He also was a part of that. And then we held the unveiling, and we had 200 people show up to this thing. And I have to tell you, when you're talking about why things work and what happens, people showing up to people who they didn't know. I mean, we were new. We were just like big mouths and not experts. But people kept showing up. And that begins to tell you something after a while, right? That somehow you have found the path and you're on it, and you're gonna and you stay on it. So the next thing that happened structurally is that we wanted to make sure people did continue to know. So we established the October 10th annual gathering. We just held the 23rd annual one on October 10th. So you can permanently put that on your calendars, please. But we also launched a radio show along with, as part of the slate of the first programming that came out of WRAR, the community radio station. So we got to be a part of that first. And then we started a newspaper. So newspapers, the press, the community press, the black press has always played a key role in moving campaigns that center the community forward. And so our newspaper started that year and is still going on and is still all volunteer, right? But it's, okay. The editor will appreciate that. So really that common thread, right? Community, right? It is us saying, we were building, and that's hard to it's hard to tell all of it, but we were building on work that had been done. There was a group of women in Henrico County who worked with Supervisor Frank Thornton to put up the historic markers at Spring Park that told the story of Gabriel's Rebellion in the vicinity of where they lived, right? And we were told about that, but we were told they didn't want to be public about it. But we wanted to acknowledge them, so we would acknowledge them, especially in those early years. The Slave Trail Commission had been working on elevating the history of slavery in Richmond by curating a trail along the south side of the river that then makes its way into Shockoe Bottom to articulate the journeys that people experienced going through slavery. There's just so much work that was going on. And then I have to say that one of the things that we really have to point to in terms of kind of jumping on a momentum that was already building is the work that was being done on the New York African Burial Ground. Because the other component about this, again, is this, one of the principles that we applied as a social justice group too, is that we were looking at ways to express to the Black community in Richmond, from the Black community in Richmond, this right to our cultural resources, this right to tell our stories, this right to define and prioritize decisions that were made about these resources. And Michael Blakey and all of the people that end up working to properly research and care for the remains, the 400 plus remains that were unearthed by bulldozer, at least initially in New York, which is reminiscent of the East Marshall Street project here. So we have a story here. One of the things that he did specifically in writing about it, because he's a scholar, scientist, is he defined this term, descendant community. And so we go from saying the community has a voice and has a right to claim these things and to assert itself, but he has made it basically an academic term that is now making its way around the world as a tool of essentially indigenous rights for voices that have not been able to claim space in an official kind of way, right? So now we are working, we now have an assumption that didn't exist 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that the descendant community has the right to make claims on these resources that we encounter, especially for the example with cemeteries. We have a lot of cemetery activism going on right now, and each cemetery is distinct in the challenge that it faces and the assets that it has to contribute to the struggle. So the Shockoe Bottom, we now call it the Shockoe Bottom African Burial Ground in order to distinguish it from all the others. But 10 years ago, we were still just calling it Richmond's African Burial Ground, right? And the historic name on the only map says Burial Ground for Negroes, and we can get into a political conversation another time about why we're not using that. But that burial ground has been so far under fill that archaeology has not been able to be done. So we don't, and we know already that the records have been lost for a long time about who might be buried there. We may never find out who was buried there. I think we will. I think it will be that kind of adjacent, perpendicular intersections, where we'll start to begin to find that out. But so that's not our first struggle. Our first struggle was to protect it from being turned into, a site as infrastructure for a baseball stadium and luxury condominium development. And then, but other cemeteries have other priorities and other threats, and also have remains. So the more contemporary cemeteries have actual remains, have research that can be done. And so, and some of you are familiar with many of these, and some of you are probably tied to several of these projects, right? So I think, just in a nutshell, that was a nutshell, sorry. We are back. We are back to the idea that it's community that has made this happen, and it's community that's going to continue to make it happen.
Agreed, yeah. One thing that struck me, I know that your career, you were a social justice activist before you became an academic historian. And it makes me think of that nexus. Doug Edgerton's book came out a long time ago, and yet somehow that story never penetrated the popular consciousness of a city, despite the drama of it, and what a powerful thing it was. How do we do a better job of translating some really amazing scholarship, but is not really consumable because it's done by academics, to a more popular audience? So that, because part of defending these sites is going to be, who cares? Why is this place so important that we can't tear it down? So all of you I'm going to let you have a free-for-all now. Yeah, have a conversation about that. What are your thoughts on how we do a better job of creating that nexus and allowing regular folks to get involved in the research process as well?
I'm just going to start by saying, one, we have to bring it out, right? So that's sort of the first responsibility, is to bring it out and make it accessible. And the other point just left me, so I'll stop talking now. What was it?
I'm going to kick off something I learned in my short, brief life as being an elected official. Give people the information they need to be empowered. Tell them the truth. Give them a connection, not only mentally up here and intellectually, but you have to give them first a visceral connection. When you give people a visceral connection to a site, all of that other stuff has to be bibliography, in my estimates, because you need the energy and the momentum and the wherewithal of the people to take the lead to make things happen. You can put their energy into a nice, pretty package for whatever reasons you may need to, for grants or for selling it to a larger intellectual crowd. But revolutions always start with the people. They're not thinking about all of this stuff. They're not going to the library and doing research. They're just seeing that they want something changed because it is destroying part of their story, part of their life, part of their community, part of their raison d'etre. So I look at it from that particular standpoint, not from the other way around.
So Anna, that kind of reflects what you said about the descendants. These are living, breathing people who actually are, these are their people. And that does make an impact more than anything that probably, well, I don't know, I won't say everything I've ever wrote, but.
Well, and so the thing that I forgot that I was trying to get to was was that point that you made about, sort of how do you take something right from the academy to the popular, and it's also how do you so it's telling, oh my God, I forgot it again. It's like too much prefacing.
All right, it's your turn, Sisha.
Yes, go ahead.
But seriously, one thing that I feel like you did become that citizen, researcher, activist all rolled up into one when you were here at the library.
Literally some community, I was just at the site. If you all go see the site, we're at 303 East Bay Street. I went to see it earlier today, and I had 2 community members ask if they could come on the site with me. And I was like, of course, come on in, just, watch your step. And they started asking me questions, and I was like, I don't know, but we can figure out the answer together. I I still don't consider myself a historic preservationist, but I do think I now do historic preservation. And I've like wrote down a lot of different notes, so let me just kind of like have a stream of consciousness really quick. I think one, I'm just a regular black girl from Richmond, guys. I wear bamboo earrings from the Asian beauty supply store. Like, I'm just, and I don't know what historic preservation is supposed to look like, but I think that how I present myself is just relatable, because I'm from here. And I try to make it simple and plain through storytelling. So I think that's one. I think two, it's easy when you come from a space of like community versus like competition. Like, all of our work intersects, and we have found ways to still show up in a loving way with one another. I think the third thing is that we have framed it in the fact that 1 in 4 Black Americans can retrace their stories to this area, and House to Highway and the work that we've all done together as an LVA team, literally we've used that house to connect to 4 different generations. Skipwith was here in the 1700s during the American Revolution. Then in the 1800s, the Skipwith Ropers, who were his descendants, were here when Jackson Ward was established as a gerrymandered political district, and were some of the ward's first council people. When you think about your story, you're directly connected to that. Then when we go through the house in the 1900s, that's when you have urban renewal, civil rights, and that's when the house is taken. And now today, you have the Black Lives Matter movement and the historic preservation efforts. So you can, through his house, 4 different generations of American storytelling can be told. And I think that when I think about the fact that we're a living project, and we are honest about that, when we learn how to archive, we go and update it on our website and our socials. When we did the architectural and the archaeological analysis, we shared the findings. If you go to the site, prime reason, Skipwith's house was 3 levels. You'll see it's only 2 levels, because when we did the archaeological analysis, they said, well, there might be some resources on this site, and don't be disruptive in how you build. And we shared that with the community. We've also been very honest at every single step. So I also think that the community has been able to lean in because we've been transparent. But when I think about the storytelling, just look how important it is not to demolish these stories that are in these walls. I'm about to just connect y'all to a couple of different things. So you have Skipwith's house. It was at the non-surviving 400 West Duval Street. What's so interesting is now our new site that was gifted to us is at 303 East Bay Street. When we did the archaeological analysis, we started to uncover all of these medicinal bottles. Why are there so many medicinal bottles on the site? It's because it's the block up from 406 East Bay Street where Sarah Garland first practiced medicine.
The house.
Yeah, the
With
house.
the house.
We were able to recover things from her site because the construction pushed things the next block over. When we also think about the John Marshall house, I know it's in, and some of those artifacts, Barbara, aren't the medicinal bottles on view? When you think about the John Marshall house, we were shooting a documentary and we shot at the John Marshall house because Skipwith was enslaved by the Ambler family. The Ambler family were the parents to Polly, who became the wife of John Marshall. So when you think about that house, he's directly connected. St. John's Church, the reverend who served as Skipwith's executor was John Blair. He was best friends with John Buchanan. He preached at St. John's Church. When you think about even the land that we are now on, Maggie Walker owned parcels on that particular block, and Edgar Allan Poe's foster father's home was relocated to that site. So I also think, like, even when we think about Gabriel, Brother Gabriel, I didn't know anything about urbanized enslavement. I had no clue about the leasing out of enslaved laborers, but Skipwith's original house was on Henrico, was in Henrico, and literally Brother Gabriel's journey into Richmond and the city center had to pass by that particular community. When I even think about the small window of manumission, Barbara, what was the date that you can manumit yourself in Virginia?
1782 is when the law changed.
1782, he files for it in 1785. He's able to get his freedom in 1789, and then that's revoked because of Gabriel's rebellion. There are so many intersecting histories, even down to the fact that we're on Bates Street. Bates was one of the Quakers who helped drive work in Jackson Ward in this particular area, and you just talked about how the Quaker community helped to save this church. I think why we've also been able to pull people in is because we found a way to elevate everybody's history in the work because all of our histories are interconnected and they're not as black and white as Richmond raised me to think that it was.
Absolutely not.
That, yeah, it's fabulous. So maybe that is a sign, and I think historic preservation folks would like to do this. It's difficult to do, is to really, as you say, think more organically about what a community actually is, what a city is, what a town is, what a county is, and there are all these intersections. And again, maybe that's a way to frame thinking about the big picture of historic preservation. What's going to be the next battle after community hospital? And can we do ourselves a service by anticipating that and looking across the entire landscape of the city and saying, let's really think about what other buildings are in danger, where are they, and how, and do the hard work of the history. Because, you know, sometimes something gets threatened, and working here at the library, people would call us up and say, in 2 weeks, we need to, do a report on this building. We don't need, I'd much rather have that already done and be able to defend an important site. So is there a wider lens we can put this in that might assist us?
Can I just say one quick thing? You do have to know the history because a lot of Anna's work goes down to the burial ground. I had no clue that Jackson Ward originally extended to the burial ground. So if you don't know, if you don't know the history, you don't even know what to protect in an odd way.
I think this is a great opportunity for doing surveys, community surveys of where in your community, talking to people who've been there for some time, getting that story down, that oral history. Somebody 75, 80 years old could probably tell you about something that used to exist in your community that you didn't know about. So that could be a project for community organizations, civic association organizations. I just want to say some really other interesting connections that we have. Your Jackson Ward community was also part of the individuals there. Your Maggie Walkers and your Virginia Randolphs were instrumental in making sure they partnered with the physicians to make Richmond Community Hospital develop. Spotswood Robinson's ancestor started Frederick Douglass Court as that community, and you see his descendant being on the federal court there with Robin Marriage, who fought, segregation, cases in Virginia. So it's true. There are a lot of intersections, and our roots go deeper than we really realize. But I think there's also the opportunity in the city to make our newcomers more aware of the history. And I don't know how that can be done better, maybe on the university level through corporations in your Africana studies, to coordinate different organizations, through students learning about the community. People come here not only as academics and students, but newcomers coming here as residents are not aware of the history here, and no wonder there is this onslaught of buildings going up and demolition happening, and people not being in protest about what's going on.
Yes, I'm going to turn to some questions, 'cause I know that's probably a few here in the audience. I think we have one right here.
Hello, thank you all for your time and everything. Hi, Anna. So I have two questions. Cheyenne. My first question is from Ms. Baskerville. What is the plan for the hospital? And then my second question is, and this is for anyone on the panel, how can I be involved in your projects and alliances that you've all founded? Thank you.
First of all, that's a question the first question was for the president of the university, the board of directors of the university, and for the Student Alumni Association. How are they going to be engaged in making sure that they are responsible to the community? One of the last almost desperate acts that happened was toward the end when an individual filed a lawsuit against the university. Of course, because the university owns the property, you have to have standing to bring suit against the university. It promised that it wouldn't demolish it, but there's also the need to continue to have pressure on the university not to do that. So the question that you first asked me is a question for the university and their commitment to not only the community, but to Black institutions, Black history. I mean, it is a HBCU. How can one HBCU be okay with the demolition of another historically Black organization and institution? So that's what I would respond to that first question. The second question?
How can I get involved in the projects and alliances that you all founded?
I don't know if I've founded formally one, but I think continuing to make information known in your network that this is a place of importance that need to be saved. We do have our Facebook, our Richmond Safe Community Hospital Facebook is still up. So we post information as soon as we get it there. But right now it's it's been really quiet. I don't know what's going to happen. Oh yeah. My community. My association. We do have membership starting November 1, and we would welcome new members into our organization. I can give you the information privately, or if you want the contact information. But the Richmond chapter of AUGS is AAHGS, which stands for Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. And we are celebrating our 15th year. We focus on professional genealogy and also Black history. It is open to anyone who wants to start learning these skills. We focus also on making sure that we interact in partnership with other organizations that are interested in learning more about how to develop their skills.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I really appreciate the panel. I have like a few quick comments, and there might be some questions baked into them. As I'm listening to all of your remarks, my mind is just abuzz. And one thing I'm thinking is, and you're sort of saying it, but I want to say it more emphatically because I don't know what's being done. There are all of these historical sites in Richmond. It's a very historical city. So I'm thinking, Sisha, maybe you and some other stakeholders, volunteers, can get together and just create a map of all of the historic sites in Richmond and be working on getting historical markers for them, because I believe there are always good actors and bad actors. It's a little more difficult to disturb something that has a historical marker on it. For instance, I live in Shockoe Bottom. On Franklin Street, between 20 and 21st Streets, is a Jewish cemetery. It's a little marker, and it's surrounded by apartment buildings, but it's surrounded by apartment buildings. The apartment buildings are not built on the grounds. There is the marker. So I'm thinking like the cemetery that you helped save that had the overgrown grass. That's another example. If it has a marker, it's a little more difficult to tear it down. And you have served on the city council. So I'm thinking as it regards the hospital, I hope you guys are just in contact with the university, but you know that if anyone has to tear down anything, regardless of whether it's private property or not, they're going to have to go through whatever the equivalent is of the Planning and Zoning Board in Richmond. So you can have your people have eyes on that. Maybe someone's checking every month to see what kind of permits have been applied for, et cetera, et cetera. I think you know where I'm going with that. So that's just kind of it. I'm just thinking, let's get everything named, and that will make it difficult to tamper with.
So I'm going to jump in because the last 30 years have very much been kind of about that, right? But I'll start with something that's very recently been established, and it's been established because of all of the efforts, all of the work, and that is the Black Historic Preservation Alliance. This is a new formation, and it consists of people of color and others who are involved in preserving and advocating for Black historic and cultural heritage sites through their different professional disciplines. So archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, genealogists, and as we speak, they are in the process of organizing surveys of Black historic resources throughout the city, and they're going to do it neighborhood by neighborhood. So that's really exciting. The historic marker piece is one that we have always, it's like, that's our first go-to. So there's probably not many sites that have been identified where the first thing we didn't do is go to the Department of Historic Resources and apply to get, you know, a historic marker. And those are important, all of these things are important to do. They're all steps in the process depending on what the site threat is, as well as what the goal is that is determined by the advocate group. So there is a lot going on, and I think what's going to be really exciting is the ability to put in front of everybody how much is going on so that people don't think that we have to reinvent a lot of things, because it's amazing. Yes, right. Yeah, yeah.
And,
no, it's
and
exciting.
well, they spoke about the markers, but I do want to say something about the map. A couple of weeks ago, we had a kickoff for Richmond 250. In my lens, when I look at America 250 and Virginia 250, I was seeing oversight of Black stories that were multidimensional. So I think we just started this email and said, hey, would all these institutions like to get together and talk about Richmond 250 and how our histories intersect? And we had a kickoff maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'm actually very proud to say every major historic site in the Richmond, Virginia area attended, and they sent their executive directors. And so now the city of Richmond, we're working with them to develop a Richmond 250 map and calendar, but not just map and calendar, but a overarching narrative about how when you leave LVA and then you come to Jackson, how Jackson's then connected to the Valentine, and how Valentine is then connected to the Black History Museum. And also telling more, the one thing that Skip with has empowered all of us with is that there were also stories of Black wealth, Black liberation, a disruptive model on what it meant to be Black and American during the American Revolution. And so making sure that the narratives aren't just downtrodden narratives that Black people were in chains and, you know, telling some multi-dimensional stories. So thank you for that. Full stories, yeah. And so I appreciate that because we saw that oversight, and we as a community are getting together actively right now to try to change that before July 4th of talking about July 4th of 1776. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we probably have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah, Troy from the Norfolk Public Library, but some suggestions. One thing that I've been working on with the Sargent collection is that trying to build a local wiki where we try to do like a history. Part of our thing is build a history of these buildings, individuals, locations, events, so that try not to reinvent the wheel, and that the research is already there, that the resources are there, so that it's not that ideally right now we're using a Google site to store it, but I mean building the biographies, the histories of these places that gets it out there, and then start connecting people to it. And I know with Old Dominion, their geography professor has done a couple projects where they focused on different neighborhoods and have done like a history of the neighborhood through its many lenses. I know Lambert's Point was one of them. And so, but I think too with the city, I was recently on the Norfolk 250 city plan, master plan, and one of the things, part of it was building up the histories of the communities, trying to get into the different communities, working with them do oral histories, do signage, do some sort of something in the community that says, hey, this is Young's Park, this is Tidewater Gardens, this is Berkeley, this is Compostela, and trying to promote that throughout the city, but also to realistically try to maybe focus like on 4 or 5 regions, neighborhoods within a year type thing, but do it on a consistent basis. So,
Sounds good.
and then using the library as like the memory, the core memory of that.
Very good.
So,
I'm going to leave you with this thought. First of all, I want to thank the panel. Please do. But I wanted to say to you this, having worked in this building for a long time, this is your building, your citizens. You own this building, you own everything that's in this building. You can become a citizen historian. That's what the folks on the second floor do. You come in, explore the sources. I know it sometimes can feel intimidating, but this building wasn't just built for historians and anthropologists. Your family is a story. I used to love working with family historians because they always discover very interesting things about their people, sometimes surprising things. But don't, I really would urge you, that is in a way a form of activism, right? If you know about a site that needs to be preserved, come here. Let the folks who have been doing this their whole careers help you find that information. So, you know, I feel sometimes that a lot of institutions can be very intimidating to come into. And there's a feeling like maybe I don't belong here, but you do belong here. So with that, thank you.